Uh, Thank you and welcome back to this policy dialogue on India-Indonesia 75 years of diplomatic relations. So we are into our final session now, and which is on the mutual learning about the democratic process in two countries. So for this session, we are very lucky to have a very eminent panel. And to take us through this session, we have Professor Sudarshan Ramaswamy with us. So over to you, sir. Please take us through this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm particularly pleased and honored to be here, to be invited to this forum, because, as they say, I have a skin in the game. My sasural is in Indonesia, my wife is Indonesian, and so the prospects and success of democracy means a lot to us presently and to the children in the family. I also am pleased because I went to Indonesia in 1999 to work for the United Nations Development Program. That's the time when the student movement, as has recently happened in Bangladesh, forced the resignation of President Suharto. And many students were on the street demonstrating, and there was gunfire, tear gas, all of that happened. And the big man took the decision to resign and hand over to Vice President Habibie for a transitional government. But that's the time when Indonesia began to take democracy seriously, because until that time, President Suharto was a sort of, for most of the time, he was a very benign dictator. But he was a benign dictator. His problems arose when his children grew up. And they began to live the jet set life and, the high flying children. And another party in the ruining the reputation of President Suharto are the international banks, because they felt that their guarantee is the Istana, the president's palace, and if they lend money hand over fist to all kinds of dud projects promoted by the children of the president, they'd be all right, because their money is guaranteed. And so they didn't do due diligence, and they took advantage of the ambition and the excitement of the son and daughter, and lent a whole lot of money. And so when the financial crisis hit, it hit Indonesia very badly, and that's when the students revolted. And because you see, I have to say he's a benign dictator, because we must remember that when there was a 1970 oil boom, Indonesia was an oil exporter, and it had a huge surplus of foreign exchange from the sale of oil. And what Suharto did was to invest that in the expansion of the health facilities, the Puskesmas and so on, and education. What did the Nigerians do? They were in the same position. They also had an oil bonanza. They sent the surplus to banks in Switzerland, in the names of the generals who were controlling Nigeria. So here was a general in Indonesia who didn't do that. So we must remember some of these things. And so when the new government started, it was very open-minded. So I was involved in creating or setting up something called the Partnership for Governance Reforms. Now, this is an extraordinary idea because it had the participation of people in the cabinet. There was, Paud Budiono, who was in the planning department, Bapanas. Susilo Bambang Udiono was then a coordinating minister for political affairs. He was a member. And then we had people from Accenture, people from, the media, the private sector coming together to say what are the reforms that are needed for Indonesia. So even this very act, where when cabinet ministers are willing to sit at the same table with people from the private sector, people from the media, and civil society, is an extraordinary phenomenon, and they were all focused on what should we be doing to ensure that democracy takes good roots. Earlier, there were always elections, but they were, they were pretty much stage managed and not, and the popular leader, got all the votes, and it was not a genuine democracy that way. But this institution, so the idea that you need to carry everybody in order to build sound democratic institutions was present in the political leadership. They're the same people. Now you must recognize what a radical change they were needed to make. They were used to the order baru, the Suharto style, where he had basically said to all civil servants, I'm going to pay you very little. The salary of the government staff was very little, even university professors very little, but you are allowed to take what the market will bear. So if you're a school teacher and you have to give a marks card to a child, see if the child comes from a rich family, then charge more. Child coming from a poor family, don't charge. That's a kind of, attitude then because you have to make ends meet. So that way, this idea that every time you go to a meeting, you come away with a envelope with some cash in it, and you get a little money on the side, was common practice. I mean, we call it mamul. Westerners may call it corruption, but you go to, my colleague Shiv Vishwanathan has written a nice essay on the necessity of corruption in, when you have a very poor community, the sense of identity and getting the ability to get some things done depends on some people willing to take some speed money, right? And the difference, of course, is that in some countries, people take the speed money and do the job. That's Indonesia. In our country, they take the speed money and then take a long time to do the job or don't do it at all. So that's one commonality. Anyway, but this was a serious attempt, and so we set up, there were amendments proposed to the constitution. There was the major decision taken at that time was to decentralize. We did it when the 74th Amendment, a long time after the adoption of our constitution, creating a third tier of government. But in the 2001, 2002, even when Mr. Habibi was the acting president, the parliament passed legislation devolving considerable powers to local authorities, and then to also have direct elections to the heads of local government and to the heads of cities and the governors of the provinces were radical steps. And so I think, and then setting up here we had, since we are contrasting, Anna Hazare started a movement in the dying days of the Manmohan Singh administration to set up the ombudsman, the Lokpal. This idea was mooted in 1963 in Parliament. Lakshmi Mal Singhvi proposed that we should have an ombudsman in 63. Nehru asked him, what is this ombudsman? Which animal does this zoo, which zoo does this animal belong? And Singhvi helpfully translated it and said, it's the ombudsman. The Scandinavians have it. It's a protector of the people. Since it's a protector of the people, we'll call it Lokpal here. So 63, we had this major agitation. The country was seized. And finally, now we have ombudsman. We have the Lokpal. We don't know who it is. Right? After all the song and dance, the political class does not want to hear very much about it. The media doesn't write about it. So we don't know what that institution does. Whereas the Anti-Corruption Commission set up and the Ombudsman Commission were set up in Indonesia at that time. And to this day, you see the the political class does not like anti-corruption commissions because they know they could be in trouble somewhere or the other. But this commission has done its job well. And so I'm saying, therefore, there are lessons to be learned from Indonesia. That's my point. And as for 75 years, I should say it goes back a little longer. Our relationship goes back to 1947. In 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru organized an Asia conference in Delhi. And he recognized the government, the nationalist government of Indonesia. At that time, the Dutch were still in power. They had come back after they went out, defeated by the Japanese. Then they reclaimed their colony. And so it was dangerous. And, Biju Patnaik ran an airline at that time called Kalinga Airlines, and he was asked to fly out a Dakota aircraft to bring Vice President Hatta and the Prime Minister of that time, Mr. Shiarir, to Delhi for the conference. So 1947 is when our relationship begins, not just after independence and diplomatic offices being opened. And therefore I'd say that we are concerned about protecting the integrity of democratic institutions. We are concerned, we often hear in this country about problems of dynasty. Our Prime Minister frequently mentions it, and the people in Indonesia are concerned that a very, very popular, much loved president is demitting office, but then he's promoting his son to be the vice president and somebody else to be in some office. But this happens. So my only point is that we can get cynical about democracy, and people in well-off people who don't really care about what happens to ordinary poor people, they can sit in their drawing rooms and say all politicians are useless scoundrels and so on. But if you have a cynical attitude to democracy, you will end up getting a dictatorship. And therefore it's very important to understand that in a democracy it will be messy, it's wheeling and dealing, it's making deals, people will change parties. My chancellor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, and his father were in the Congress party in this election. 2 weeks before the election, he got a ticket to contest in Kurukshetra, his old constituency, by switching parties. Now, this happens in a democracy. Now, we can't be very judgmental about it, is my point. But the institutions matter. And that's why I'd like to invite my colleagues to focus on that dimension of the institutional foundations and bulwark that democracies need. So I'll go by the order in which the speakers are listed and invite Dr. Broto Vardio, who is, specializes in international relations, and he's, his bio is there, you've all got it, so it won't take up time reading it. So I invite you, Pa Broto, for your reflections.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Rawasmami, for your kind word on Indonesian democracy. But actually, to be honest, when Pak Arisman from CESIAS contacted me a few weeks ago, and he asked me to talk about learning from Indonesian democracy in India, that's quite a shock for me, especially because, as you also mentioned, in terms of democracy, we are very young, actually. So it's begun in 1998, while you, India, on the other hand, you have a longer history of democracy, and I think it has been consolidated in a way. And the other shock is basically because when we talk about Indonesian democracy today, scholars around the world basically argue that Indonesia is on its way to a reverse way of democracy. So we are struggling very hard to avoid this reverse way, and hopefully we will manage to deal with this one. And maybe we will have to deal again in the future. So what I want to share is basically framing the Indonesian transition to democracy theoretically, because I came from the university, and then because you mentioned about the success story, then I will also point it out the problems that we have. Which one? Oh, this one. Okay. Okay. So I will also talk about the problems that we have and the problem that we are currently facing, and we don't know for how long we're going to face this. And then I will talk a bit about the recent development. As you, I think all of you learned that Indonesia has just conducted the election, national election, and we will have our district election on October 2024. So it's quite a challenge for us nowadays. And then I will talk a bit about the future trajectories of our democracy, basically. So When we talk about transition democracy, transition of to democracy in Indonesia, basically we have to acknowledge that the Indonesian democracy falls within what Huntington mentioned as the transplacement model, meaning that when we decided to set up our course to democracy, we still have the old elites. So you mentioned Suharto family, and of course we thought Golkar Party Suharto will not, he would not reign for such a long time. And then also when we talk about the old elites, we also talk about the Indonesian armed forces, which is a crucial element in the progress of our democracy. Uh, and in addition, we also have what we call as the new elites, basically in the new emerging force, as you mentioned, students who happen, I think I was one among the students in this building at that time because I was a student of my university at that time. And yes, it was a great time because we have holiday in the university, and for the first time in the history, in my history, basically we are hand in hand with our university professors in fighting against the old regime. Uh, but again, when we mention about the new elites, in a way, a few years after, they will become part of the old elites. So we will have another new elites. And I think we are very lucky because we have the tradition of youth movement in Indonesia. So this youth basically became the backbone of these new emerging forces. A few days ago, for example, there was a huge demonstration in Jakarta because our parliament wanted to revise the law on district election, which is basically it will allow someone younger than 30 years to become governor candidate. And we all disagree with that because according to the student, they are thinking that this must be a way for part of the old elites to be able to basically to support their offspring to become the candidate in regional election. Uh, so with that in mind, what I want to say is basically when we talk about Indonesian democracy, we will see that it is basically a political transaction between the old elite and the new elite, and it will be like that for the rest of the time. So the option is basically whether they're going to cooperate one another or they're going to oppose one another. And in the case of Indonesia, since 1998, what I can conclude is basically there were times where the old elite and the new elite are cooperating, but there was also a time where the old elite and the new elite are opposing to one another. So, what is the problem with Indonesian democracy? One of the problems with the Indonesian democracy is related to the role of the armed forces. You mentioned that after Suharto stepped down, there was some reform within the military. The military were no longer part of the parliament, and they disbanded what they call as the political section of the armed forces. Yes, it took place in 1999 onward. Uh, but when we talk about reforming the armed forces, we can say that until today, we have a successful adoption of rules and regulation. We have the law of the armed forces and also the law of national defense, which basically prohibit the armed forces from entering into politics. But when we talk about military business, it's still an ongoing fight, basically. So it is successful in a way that the armed forces no longer has their, how to call it, business apparatus. But we still see the individual generals own their own business supported by the armed forces. So we still see that. And then the third problems that we have with the armed forces is basically up until today, we haven't managed to change anything related to our territorial command. This is important because in the 32 years of Suharto era, basically Suharto used the armed forces territorial command to make sure that all elements in Indonesia will comply to whatever he want at that time. So it's a very, it's basically mimicking civilian bureaucracy to the point where if you go to certain part of Indonesia, the remotest part of Indonesia, you will never find government officials there, but you will find military officers in that part, in that particular remote area of Indonesia. So that is the problems that we have right now. And the hardest of reforming the military fully is basically we are facing the promotional logjams. Becoming a member of the Armed Forces Indonesia is a dream for almost every Indonesian children. So why we do have that kind of dream? Because if you join the military, then there is a high possibility that you will be someone with power in Indonesia. Uh, and hence, there was a lot of young Indonesian, who joined the armed forces, so they enter into the military academy. And the result is we have a cumulative of a lot of military officers nowadays. So the number of lieutenant colonel and colonel are really reaching to a point where the armed forces could no longer provide them with posts, basically. So what happened with Indonesia is that we open up the way for these military personnel, for these military officers, to join the civilian posts. It is a very restricted area because it says, according to the regulation, it says that they can only join the security-related or defense-related civilian posts. So that's what happened. Uh, and then the other problem is that in Indonesia, if you meet with ordinary Indonesian and you ask what is their perception of the armed forces personnel, and they will always see the armed forces personnel as someone with authority, and they were capable of leading any particular institution. So what happened then is civilian groups in Indonesia, political parties in Indonesia, they like to nominate military personnel or former military personnel to certain position, not only within the party, but also to become the candidate of district leaders or the candidate of governor, or even to the candidate of the parliament member. So this is also the other problems. Why, despite the fact that our military personnel are not granted to vote in the election, uh, but they do have the power to lead the society to choose for certain candidate. Uh, so that is the first problem. And the second problem that we're currently facing is basically in Indonesia, soon after Suharto stepped down, we experienced a series of violent conflict. And when we deal, the way we deal with violent conflict is basically we will use the armed forces. So basically, the existence of violent conflict in Indonesia opens the way for the armed forces to remain as an important player. So they always have their political bargain, basically. Even though the number of civilian violent conflict in Indonesia is decreasing, but there is also another issues with terrorism. The number of terrorism activities in Indonesia has been increasing, and then in recent days there are tensions between groups in Indonesia. As I believe you all understand, Indonesia is very diverse, both in terms of ethnic group and also religious group. So the tension between ethnic groups and also religious groups is something that is common in Indonesia, to the point where sometimes we need the armed forces to help us to settle the issues. So these are the problems that basically provide an avenue for the armed forces to again have their own bargain with the civilian groups, and it helps them to maintain their significance. So what happened now? First, there was a debate about whether we should change our law of the armed forces and law of the national defense. Basically, what the armed forces wanted right now is the extension of their role. And we were fighting really hard for this. The law, I think it was submitted to the parliament a few months ago, after the election, after the presidential election. And I think yesterday, the parliament decided that we will drop the discussion, that they will drop the discussion on this initiative. which is a good thing for now. But we don't know whether the armed forces will again try uh, to basically to revise these laws in the future, which it's might happen in the future, considering that the new president elected have military backgrounds and he has a lot of military aides or former military aides around his circle. And the other issues is with the identity-based politics that is worsened in Indonesia in the past few years, especially since the Jakarta provincial governor election in 2017. Which is, by the way, I think maybe when we talk about this identity-based politics, it will be, I think we can find commonalities between Indonesia and India when we talk about this in terms of whether it will affect our democracy in the future and so on and so forth. And the last one is the future trajectories. So if we consider the three different aspects that I have mentioned, the first one is whether the armed forces will remain as an important player, and then what would be the level of violent conflict in Indonesia, and the final one is whether civilian groups will remain solid in the future. So I think the trajectory of our democracy is not really well, basically. So I tried to calculate from 1998 until 2024, and this is on scale of 1 until 5. We can see that basically, even though you have very kind words on Indonesia, but I think on the other hand, we are facing a relatively, well, I would not say a lot, but few troubles. Yeah, so we're facing a few troubles on the future trajectory. So I think in the future, those three variables will remain important, and hopefully we can tackle that, or maybe we can learn from India, if possible. But I don't know because I'm not really a student of Indian democracy, so I'm looking forward to hear from Dr. Sanjay Kumar and Dr. Rajesh Tandon on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The time we have Dafri online. Have we got him? Yes. Yeah. Can you see us, sir? Can you hear? He's got to unmute, no? Okay. Over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All right, now the time is for me.
Yes, you have about 12 minutes.
Okay. So, all right. Hang on. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, especially to the distinguished speakers and also guests. I would like to thank you very much to the RIS for inviting me to participate in this such important and also timely program, I think. I was asked to discuss about the strengthening democratic process in Indonesia and India, learning from the mutual experience, and I try to, let's say, make a kind of additional comments on what already mentioned by my colleagues Broto. All right. So this is the agenda actually. I would like to talk about Indonesia and India, the different but the same. And then I would like to talk about experience of democracy practices in Indonesia, learning from each other, success and failures, and what both nations can do from now on. And then closing remarks. As we know that Indonesia and India have such a differences in many aspects, but also both countries as a kind of similarity and many other aspects. India is a larger democratic country with the majority Hindu populations. Indonesia is a democratic country with the what's so called the democratic Pancasila with larger Muslim population. Both countries have the same history, being colonized by other nations for a long time, and the level of social economic welfare of the nation is also relatively the same. Per capita income, for example, level of social inequality, level of public education, etc., etc. From the fact, they can actually learn from each other uh, in order to strengthen the democracy's process in the both countries. So let me see again about the facts about the, Indonesia and India. Again, as we see that Indonesia is the 15th largest country in the world, and India, the second largest countries. Population, of course, India is the one of the biggest or the largest population in the world. Indonesia is the fourth largest. Indonesia once colonized by Netherlands and England, and also colonized by Japan, while the India also colonized by Netherlands and England. And GDP, we see that the Indians more than twice, all right, Indonesia, while Indonesia just 1.34 trillion US dollars, and India is 3.74. And also about the GDP per capita, India is quite higher than Indonesia. Indonesia is higher actually, due to the I think the number of population which is smaller than India. Now, what I would like by that facts actually that the fact have a significant influence on the political and democratic process in both countries. For example, India liberal democratic countries, parliamentary system, while Indonesia democracy Pancasila, presidential system, where in India, Hinduism greatly influenced India's social, political values and norms, while Islam influenced social and political value and norms. Now, this is reflected in the constitutions, law and regulation, as well as the form of various state institutions and other civil societies organizations in both countries. With such a background and condition, it can be understood how difficult it is to manage both countries. However, along the way, it's very clear that democracy in both countries has run quite well, even though it has experienced such a complex and challenging dynamic. Now, if we see the Indonesian Democratic Index, for example, so far in 2023, 6.53, or ranked is 56 out of 167 countries in the world, while India much better, 7.18, ranking the 41 out of the 160 countries. So, as I said before, it's quite clear the kind of differences and similarity between the both countries. Now, look at the problems faced by the both countries, especially by Indonesia. In Indonesia, high poverty rate, inequality, lack of concern and sensitivity, social, economic, and political condition, low level of education resulting in low political literacy, thick social and sectarian political friction, which strengthen social political sensitivity, which can automatically trigger social and political conflict in society. Political cultures, norm, and ethic of elite tend to be inconsistent with the or even contradict to the value of democracy itself, especially Indonesia. Politics merely seen as a means of opportunity to gain power, money, and social status. So it's not surprising, for example, in Indonesia, the corrupted behavior of the elites including money politics, is getting stronger, which is finally is really impact negatively to the process of democracy in Indonesia. Now, let we take some lesson from Indonesia democratic experience. Let's say, very short, during the Soekarno, such a dynamic, there's so, hanging system, alternative power, many time ideological conflict, economic difficulties, and the system from presidential moved to parliamentary system, and then guided democracy with applying what's so-called nasakum, nationalism, religion, and communism, which is then become the problem for the Sukarno regime, removal from the power in 1966. In the new order era, already mentioned by the moderator, actually, it's about the problem there. Well, democracy Pancasila, presidential system, relatively stable economics, but lately corruption, collusion, nepotism has become what a kind of toxic, attitudes, in Indonesia. Soeharto finally then forced, removed from power in 1998. During the Habibie era, I said, the golden era of the Indonesian democracy is under the presidency of B.J. Habibie. Unfortunately, his term is very short, so more or less 1 year, but he successfully, let's say, changed such a fundamental reform in Indonesia political, economic, and social life, such as improvement of economic condition, enforcement of human rights, expansion of democracy, release of some of the political detainees, and many other. While Abdurrahman Wahid is the president of Father of Tolerance, and Megawati, try to push the Indonesian democracy based on the ideology of Pancasila. Era Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono much more democratic. We know that the Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono is a kind of democratic leader, but he also successfully, indeed the direct involvement of the military forces in the Indonesian politics, placed professionals in the cabinet, but failed to eradicate corruption. What about the current President Joko Widodo? Many observers is characteristic by the strong influence of oligarchy, dynastic politics, abuse of power, and had failed to also to eradicate it of corruption. So what then can be taking as learnings from the Indonesia success? The era of Habibie, as I said before, where Habibie successfully released political prisoners, allowed the establishment of new political parties, ratification of human rights conventions on convention, improve of the economic of Indonesia. While Gus Dur, as I said before, strengthening tolerance in Indonesia among the Indonesia citizen, and implements of the direct presidential and regional election in the era of Megawati, and other important thing that during the Indonesian experience, especially since the Habibie, Indonesia successfully and established various institutions related to the effort to strengthening democracy, such as a constitutional court, judicial commission, general election commission, national human rights, corruption eradication commission, and many other. Great variation of regulation and law, such as political party law, election law, regional election law, which is, is a very important one. But again, learning listen to strengthen democratic process is not only from the best practices or success, but also from the pillar of the previous effort. For example, Indonesia can be said failure to uphold democratic principle, failure to prevent corruption, collusion, and nepotism, failure to fight poverty and backwardness, failure to prevent human rights violation till now, and the most importantly, learns from the failure to practice of political culture. This is in accordance with the principle of democracy, such as ignorance, ethic, and moral, and in practical politics. So this is the aspect that can be taken as lesson learned by the both countries. First, learn from each other about the system or structure and working mechanism of the political institution, legislative, executive, judicative, and so on. And also listen from the role of the other democratic institutions like political parties, GSO, media, and so on. Also legal aspect, how to create and implement regulation and law in accordance with the democratic principles such as law regarding the election, law of political parties, and so on. The nature and character of political system, inclusive or must be open, fair, and also participatory. And most importantly, both nations can learn from each other how to develop and strengthen the practice of political culture based on their respective values and norms, but in the line with the demand of democracy. For example, both countries must learn from each other how to uphold, maintain ethic, moral, and politics, including the exercise of power, avoiding nepotism, coalition, and also corruption. And it is almost the last one. So what both nations can do from now on? First, developing and intensifying dialogue through official bilateral and multilateral forum about this issue. And second, increasingly people-to-people context, especially academic, intellectual, business people, activists, media, CSO, and to get know and understanding about one another, and increasing knowledge, mutual understanding, learning between people and people countries through student exchange. I think this is one very important one. I'm not really well known about how many Indonesian students, for example, study in India and how many Indian students study in um, Indonesia. Yeah. In the future, I think this is a very important one. So, like what the other countries have been doing so far, for example, Australia, United States, China currently, and many other countries. And the fourth one, create institution or forum for dialogue and discussion on democratic issues according to the both countries, and take lessons and input from this forum or institution strengthening democratic process in both countries. As a closing remark, once again, I would like to say that um, both countries have long been trying hard, actually, to, let's say, strengthening democratic process in their respective countries. By looking at the social, economic, political complexity, it can be said that the effort to strengthen democratic process in both countries can be said quite successful, at least when viewed from the perspective of democracy phase. Democracy as a part of conflict resolution. However, this does not mean that the both countries have a success in escaping the challenges and obstacles that continue to be faced according to the dynamic social, economic, and political development. So, in the future, considering that both countries have difference and many similarity, have a very good relation and cooperation since long ago, they have a great opportunity to learn from each other how to strengthen the democratic process in each country. Of course, the process of learning from each other requires time, energy, and talks from each other. But based on the good intention, hard work, knowledge, and experience that they possess it by the both countries, I'm sure that the process of learning from each other can be carried out well in the future. Thank you very much. I hope this presentation can spark discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Padafri. So I hope there'll be some time for discussions. We've got two excellent panelists from the Indian side. I must compliment RIS for picking them because they are unique individuals. Dr. Sanjay Kumar is well known as a scholar, political scientist, an authority on elections, election data, all of that. He's got several books. But the distinguishing feature is that he's not an academic sitting in some ivory tower, looking at second-hand textbooks and, writing ideas that occur. I mean, he's at heart an activist. I mean, CSDS was started by Rajni Kotari, who believed in what is called a non-party political activism. That is, you're not formally associated with any political party, but you're not a disinterested observer. You take sides, you want to articulate that, and to be in touch with the common people, and to know languages other than English. That's another big limitation of some of us who just know English. Then the sources of our materials are all, those who can speak English and English language texts, but then most of the people don't speak that language, and so he's a rare scholar that way. I mean, there are only a handful of them in our country, so I must compliment RAS for having him over. And on the other hand, here is this man, Dr. Rajesh Tandon. He's the doyen of civil society activism and ideas in this country. I mean, he's absolutely extraordinary. Priya's been an institution that merits a hallowed place in the institutions that have, many institutions in civil society have a short shelf life. And that's often because they kind of serve some, short-term cause or some short-term purpose, and then it fizzles out. But, Dr. Rajesh Tandon set up this participatory research in Asia, and I'd say that, I often read, and, he now has these random notes which I never miss, because they are all full of ideas. And that's because I'm the Dean of a School of Public Policy, and I know that the one big problem for public policy is that the public is missing. There's somebody makes policy, but how and when the public are consulted, whether they have a say in the policy, whether there's any feedback that is seriously taken from the public on the part of the policymakers, all of these are democratic deficiencies. So we'll have their perspectives and then a dialogue after that. So over to you, Dr. Sanjay Kumar.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan, for the kind introduction. He did mention that, this institute where I work, CSDS, people do research or work on politics and take sides. I do take side, but not political side. I take the side of evidence. And we have been doing a lot of data collection from the ground. So whatever I wish to say by way of how politics in the country is changing, I always take side of the evidence. A brief presentation which I am going to do is largely on looking at how the electoral processes of the two countries, India and Indonesia. And I had done very little work on Indonesia. I must say that I put one of my researchers to start looking at what's happening in Indonesia. And we also, we have institutional partners with an organization called ANFREL, Asia Network for Free and Fair Election. And whenever there's an election, they ask us to send some observer. So we had sent an observer who stayed in Indonesia for 1 month during the election. So he has helped me in collecting a lot of information. And I realized that there is a learning process if I look at how elections take place in Indonesia, and for Indonesia also there is some learning processes. So that's in brief I am going to share. Just to flag that in 2024, elections took place in both the countries. In Indonesia it was earlier, and then in India we had the elections in the month of May, June. So I'm just looking at the electoral processes. What are the similarities? What are the differences? It's like textbook. Similarities, differences, and the learning. So similarities, in India, elections are being conducted by Election Commission of India, ECI. Also, there is an election commission, General Election Commission in Indonesia, which is called Komisi Pemilihan Umum. So, which is KPU. Sorry for my misspelling or mispronunciation. Differences. What are the differences? Now, if I look at the elections, so we have separate elections for the national election, state assembly election, local body election, and even for the national elections, we have a multi-phase election. As you know, the recent Lok Sabha elections, the national elections was held in 7 phases. And recently when Jammu and Kashmir elections are being held, it is being held in 3 phases, 18 of September, 25th of September, and then 1st of October. So a 90-member assembly constituency votes in 3 phases. In Indonesia, elections for multiple positions, president, parliament, etc., they are all held in one single day. So what is the learning process? Don't misunderstand me, I am not in favor of one nation, one election. But the debate which is going on in the country by the ruling party, by Prime Minister, advocating for what are the merits for India having one nation, one election, which is to say, he started with all the elections for the parliament, state assemblies, and the local body should be held together. Though now the discussion centers around Lok Sabha and the state assembly, the national election and the state assembly elections to be held together. A committee was also set up by our ex-president Ramnath Kovind, and he has already submitted a report. So if at all there is a learning process, which I don't favor, I am not in favor of one nation, one election because of several reasons. But that's the learning process if the government wants to take it forward. That okay, if you want to minimize multiple elections in this country, that's one lesson India can learn from Indonesia. Forms of government, basically 2 differences. In India, whenever elections take place, there is generally you would have pre-election coalition. One or two more political parties join hands to form the government. And also at times when the coalition or single party is not able to form the government because they don't get a majority, so the 2 parties which formed governments together or contested elections together, they break the coalition after election and maybe join hands with the other party, their own rivals, to form the government. So we have pre-election, pre-coalition, pre-election coalition and post-election coalition. And it happens very quickly, before elections, even after election. Normally, what I gathered is that in Indonesia, largely it is pre-election coalition. That's the dominant pattern. So I think maybe the learning is, and I keep saying, my argument is that whenever there is a talk about electoral reforms, big ideas come about electoral reforms. But basics, if you have formed a pre-election coalition, maybe that's one suggestion. So that's one learning. Pre-election coalition, if you want to break the coalition, but maybe for some period of time, the party should not be allowed to join your own rivals against whom you have contested the election. That could be one learning from the system which is existence in Indonesia. Now looking at election commission, independence of election commission and the model code of conduct. So in India, election commission is there and there is something called model code of conduct. The difficulty is that the model code of conduct is there, and if you follow what is happening during last couple of years, at least 4 or 5 years, the model code of conduct is not being implemented properly. There are lots and lots of anxieties, especially with regard to the opposition parties, that model code of conduct is not being implemented in a free and fair manner. Its election commission is being partisan. So in Indonesia, although there is a independent election commission, but it works under an oversight of election supervisory body. So there is a body over the election commission in Indonesia. So if in Indonesia, if it is figured out that election commission has not been able to, is taking partisan role, so there is a supervisory body, so there could be some checks and balances. In India, as you know, and last 4 or 5 years, there would be several cases of model code of conduct, and the cases go to the court, or you appeal to the election commission, but there is a lot of anxieties about that. So maybe, I'm not saying that there should be a super election commission, but some learning process, how to make model code of conduct more effective, which could be applied equally for all the political parties. Financing, same problem with both the countries, use of muscle and money power. All the provisions that exist in Indonesia regarding finances exist in India also. But the problem is about strict enforcement of the rule with regard to what a candidate can spend, what a party can spend, etc. So rules are there, and the electoral bond controversy, which is the new one recently. So the rules are there about what a candidate, there is a limit which a candidate can spend, but it is not being enforced properly. That is a problem even in Indonesia, not big learning from both the countries, but I think the learning from each other is to try and make sure, try and have rules, regulation, so that the rules which are being formulated with regard to election financing, election funding are implemented properly. A couple of things in this slide. Again, we have multiple phases of elections. And we use EVMs, electronic voting machine. There are lots and lots of controversies now with regard to electronic voting machine, but still electronic voting machine is being used in India for holding all the national election and the local body and the state assembly elections. Local body elections are still in many states are being held using the ballot. Presidential elections are still being held using the ballot paper. But in Indonesia, still the elections are being held using ballot paper. They don't use EVMs. Challenges, vast geography. And in Indonesia, it was mentioned in the last presentation, last session also, there are 17,000 islands. So both has the different kinds of challenges. We keep hearing news about one polling station at a distant place. There was only one single voter in that polling station who died recently. And the election commission for the last several elections used to set up polling station for just one single voter. So these are the challenges. Challenges are equally challenging for India as well as for Indonesia. But look at the turnout. Last Lok Sabha election, the last national election, we had 66% turnout. And Indonesia, the last national election, we had 80% turnout. And if you look at the proportion of polling booth where people go to vote, in India, one booth is set up for in the range of 1200 to 1500 voters. In Indonesia, one booth is set up for 300 voters. So I think there is a learning process for both India and Indonesia. For India, maybe we should try and increase the number of polling stations. It would have other logistic difficulties, but if we increase the number of polling stations, maybe fewer voters would be allowed or asked to vote at one polling station. This might lead higher turnout. So that's learning for India. For Indonesia, EVMs, even though there are lots and lots of controversies with regard to EVMs in India, but I still believe, I work in a research institute, when people keep asking this question, what's my opinion about EVM? I have no evidence whether EVMs have been rigged or can be rigged, cannot be rigged. And I keep saying, still, there may be issues, there are anxieties, and I know, keeping from people's point of view, more people now have shown less trust in EVM compared to what it was 10 years ago. That's true. True means based on the data. But still, I think EVMs are being used, elections, and once election results are declared, everybody accepts it and the government is formed. That's a learning for Indonesia, because I know that while we are able to count the votes in just one day, not even one day, few hours now, 5 hours, 10 hours, but Indonesia, it goes on and on for a very long time. So this could be a learning process for Indonesia. Think of using EVMs. I'm not saying you must, but that's one kind of a learning process. Information technology. There are rules which allows government to stop internet in one location, one city, one state, etc. But there is no rules, no provisions to regulate misinformation and fake news. So that's a big difficulty as far as Indian elections are concerned. A lot of fake news are being, and we did some research during this election and also the previous round of assembly election, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and we figured out rough data. 80%, 70% of what is being posted on the social media is is misinformation. Misinformation not in a sense wrong, but it is criticizing the other parties whether it is justified or not. Only 30% parties and and candidates say about themselves what they have been able to do or what they will be doing if they get elected. It's 80% is about mudslinging on other parties and other candidates, and there is no way you can control, no rules, no regulation for regulating misinformation. Uh, so I am not sure whether Indonesia has very strict laws about that, but this could be a learning process for both the countries, that there is a need for that, because elections are now, social media has penetrated so much. And I believe that this was also a data given in the last session, that mobile phone penetration is much higher, or internet penetration is much higher in Indonesia compared to India. So I think there is a need to think about how to control misinformation and fake news, because this is going to be a big platform on which elections are going to be contested in coming years. Press freedom. Both the countries, technically press is free, but out of 180, now India has slipped down to 159. Indonesia is far better on that index, press freedom index, 111 out of 180. So I think learning for India, yes, we can keep saying press is free and fair, but these days you name one journalist and people will say, oh, this journalist belongs to this party or that party. You name a television channel and people will say, oh, this is pro-government, anti-government. The situation has reached to such a stage, and there are cartoons, jokes, that this journalist is a member of this party. There are lots and lots of anxieties about how media is functioning, especially at the time of elections, or how journalists take sides about political parties. So I think there is a learning for India, that we need to think carefully, we need to think hard, that how do we allow independence to the media, because that's very important in any electoral democracy. Just last 2 slides. Religious tension in India, particularly between Hindus and Muslims, and often being exploited during elections. That's a prevalent mode now, that there are religious tensions, especially between Hindus and Muslims, and these are being exploited, especially at the time of election. If you look at all the speeches during the last Lok Sabha election, and any elections during last 10 years, you will figure out yourself that how religious divide is being, there is an effort to use religious divide to mobilize the voter. Same applies with regard to dividing or using caste identities to mobilize the voters. There are tensions even in Indonesia, but it is largely about Muslims and the ethnic Chinese. So both the countries need to think about that. By law, caste and religious identities cannot be used to mobilize the voters, but this is being frequently used in India, and I believe that's happening even in Indonesia. So something needs to be done to strengthen IPC Act Section 153 and Representation of People Act 1951. I think this is the summary of what I have already mentioned. I don't think there's any need to go step by step, but I think there is a scope for learning from the electoral process of both the countries. It may be slightly higher for India or slightly lower for India, but I think still there is a scope for India to improve or learn from the electoral processes which is being followed in Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was superb, excellent. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the 3 speakers. Thank you, Sudarshan, for your very warm introduction. Thank you, RIS. You will be relieved that I don't have a PPT. I can see smiles on your face. Very nice. I want to tell you my interactions with the less formal institutions of democracy in India and Indonesia, because you have heard enough about political parties and all. I first met colleagues from Indonesia in 1980s in the context of United Nations International Literacy Year, which I was very active in mobilizing particularly in the Asia Pacific region. I was vice president of an international coalition, and besides the work we were doing in India, we were also supporting mobilization on this issue. And we realized, that was my first realization of the geographical and ecological diversity of Indonesia. Even though we knew India is, but your region, your country is just enormous in that sense. And the challenge, we used to say, oh, we have so many languages. Oh, please, languages in Indonesia. Because literacy cannot be learned without mother tongue. And that was my first. I think we were a little more organized in literacy by that time, both in the non-governmental and the government sector by 1988, 89. And there was, through the UNESCO platforms, there were interesting exchanges where ways of promoting literacy in mother tongue that we had developed were shared with Indonesian colleagues. It was at that time that I discovered that environmental movement in Indonesia was stronger than in India. WALI, your largest NGO coalition on environment, was set up in 1980. Of course, Center for Science and Environment was also set up in 1980, but you had a very vocal nationwide conversation about, given the ecological diversities of your region. The third encounter I had was when I was chairing a meeting between World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and the Asia Pacific Civil Society Coalition. And the issue was displacement due to large dams, industrial activity, where the people who were displaced were really never properly looked after. And it was then that I discovered the challenge of displacement that was happening in west part of your region, and the consequences that it had. And the scale of that was enormous. And so even in that 3-day consultation which was held in Manila, the Asian Development Bank headquarters, we were able to share lessons around that. And I must say that the colleagues from Indonesia were more thoughtful because of your specific context. And I learned a great deal. It was, our local government constitutional changes were made in 1993-94. And as Sudarshan mentioned earlier, yours were made a little later. But we started hosting civil society folks in the early 2000s, after the Reformasi period, to learn about the reasonably radical constitutional changes India had done by decentralization, devolution, a constitutionally guaranteed representation for women, and a mandate for local level planning. And in 2009, we hosted a delegation of people from information commissions of Indonesia, because Right to Information Act was passed in India in 2005, and we were working very actively with other coalitions to inform local bodies, municipalities and panchayats, our local bodies, how they can play a role in right to information, and link that right to information to ground level planning. We continued to interact with our colleagues at that time and did a couple of workshops on social accountability. And that actually led to a very interesting conversation between us, but also including other Asian countries, particularly Cambodia, Laos, which were coming about, and the question of linking information disclosure and transparency to everyday planning on the ground. And later on we learned that while the experience of grassroots planning in India has been quite uneven, and even some of the progress that was made in the late 90s and early 2000s was slipping back, you created a mechanism which is robust and is still working. And that is because your devolution is accompanied with systems also devolved. Our devolution remained political devolution, and systems devolution was left to individual state governments and their respective political formations of the time. So that difference, the systematization of devolution in the planning of socio-economic development programming is a great lesson from Indonesia for us in India. And I think it is around that time that your programming of open government partnership, which seeds were sown when Sudarshan described in 98, 99. And I still find my counterparts in your country and some academics there working more openly in this open government pact, despite all the frustrations and limitations. And in the context of trilateral cooperation, in the context of South-South, South-North cooperation, preceding your hosting of G20, etc., it was very interesting that while conversation in India was happening about multi-stakeholder partnerships, they in 2019 produced an institutional mechanism to do so and a guide. So what I think we are great with innovation at the grassroots level. Our civil society produces lots of innovations, but then we, in my view, fritter them away. You learn from those, you take, and then you systematize and you put things in place so that they continue. And I think Indians can learn a great deal with that. The final point I want to make is that I have had a wonderful interaction with academic colleagues in your country, and I work very closely with university in Surabaya, Sunan Impal, and I have been regularly receiving their engagement. What I like about the mechanisms your universities have put in place is that all undergraduate students have to spend a couple of months within the first year in local communities, living there. And in this country, we have been debating from medical doctors to civil engineers to everybody trying to live in society and learn from society. You have put that system in place, and I find it very valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we have a little time. I just wanted to say that beyond the realm of democracy and politics, we in India have a lot to learn about India from Indonesia. I'll give you my personal experience. In Yogyakarta, at the backdrop of the Prambanan temples, you have a daily show, a ballet on the Ramayana. Weekends, it's the whole Ramayana, but weekday, it's one episode. And the one I was watching was devoted to a character in the Ramayana called Sampati. Now, I thought I've been grown up, know all about Ramayana. I did not know who this character Sampati is. Indonesia had an airline called Sampati. The main airline, the national airline is Garuda. And you have other airlines, Jatayu. But Sampati, I had to learn by watching that ballet. And the other one that impressed me was that the Society for the Protection of Dogs in Indonesia is called the Yudhishthira Society. Now, it took me some time to find out, for me, having grown up in this culture, what is this connection? But see, it should be a part of the common sense of the Indonesian people to call a society for dogs Yudhishthira, but it takes someone like me, educated and all that, a bit of a lag before I could connect what happens in the last parva of the Mahabharata, and Yudhishthira and the dog, right? So these are things, we are valuable. I mean, I learnt this kind of and there are many more such. So I think we need, apart from just the political lessons we could learn, much more people-to-people contact and much more learning about the civilizational. If you describe India or the Indic region as a civilizational state, Indonesia is part of that very same civilizational state, and therefore there are many opportunities I think we should open up. I would say, though, I mean, as an aside, that Ministry of External Affairs needs to do much more to bring people-to-people contact than has happened hitherto. So the floor is open for your comments, and then we'll try to wind up at the scheduled time if possible.
I'm Dr. Gautam Jha. I teach Bahasa Indonesia in JNU, and my background is IR. So I have, though I have a lot of questions, but there is paucity of time. So I briefly I have one small questions from Indonesian counterpart. They have both speakers were excellent. The first time I was hearing from Indonesian side, they're very upfront, openly talking about. So this is really great. And yesterday I saw one big demonstration at the Gajah Mada University. So he's Professor Daffodil University, that around 1,000 teachers and academicians, they came out with the recent reforms taking place at the parliament. So this is really great that a lot of civil society is also getting stronger in Indonesia. And with the last elections about the financing, as Mr. Sanjay also said, that financing, one thing I just found it from social media also and print media also, that China was also substantially financing that Prabowo's party. This was one thing, and that was shown when it was already emerged that Prabowo is the winning candidate. The ambassador of China was in his house with a puppy cat, you remember. So how all the things was taken by Indonesian media and Indonesian academicians? This is one question. And second question from Mr. Sanjay, that who said about the pre and post election coalitions. See, in Indonesia, the first thing, I see it is very compromising politics. Then you compare to India. India, we do not do it so openly the way it is done in Indonesia. The first example is Prabowo himself. In 2014 election, he was completely opposing opposition party. He kept criticizing Jokowi, right, and his parties and his coalitions. Immediately after the election, he started creating mayhem, the demonstration, etc. And seeing the mayhem will go to worse, then Jokowi brought him as the defense minister. So you see, the coalition is kind of more compromising, And the third thing, what Indonesian civil societies are still, the Jokowi's son becoming incoming president, vice president, and how the constitutions, Undang-Undang Dasar, has been manipulated with this brother-in-laws becoming judge and then changing these things. So these things mark a great, what you call the black spot in the health of the democracy in Indonesia. So I would like to hear from all these three
Thank you.
speakers.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
We take a few questions and then the panelists can have the last word. Any other? The panelists can ask one another questions as well. So, all right, so that gives us a bit of time for, I request my colleague from the Gajah Mada University, Daffodil, to take up all of them, but some of the points that were just raised. Did
Thank
you join
you.
the demonstration? He said that he was in the student demonstration in 1998.
I participated in that, yesterday and the other days demonstration. I'm a student. So what I would like to say is, I agree that the role of the civil society, especially students, is very important, in the Indonesian democratic process. Not only now, but since the beginning of Indonesians independence, let's say during Soekarno, for example, right? At that time, the student is, plays a very important role in protesting the, let's say, the application of the Nasakom ideology, for example, right? And also the existence of the Communism Party at the time, right? And also during the Suharto, the pardon of Suharto, because the student movement, of course, in 1997, 1998. And now, sorry, from Suharto era, after the reform or reformasi era, there's a kind of problem with the students, in Indonesia. They tend to be, what's it called, opted, by the regime of the power. Uh, why? That is simply because the strategies, applied by the government at the time, how to could manage the or navigating or manage the student movements, in Indonesia. Let's say by so many rules, including the role of the rector of university, for example, and blah blah blah. And currently, what happened now, is very interesting as well. What happened to the Jokowi regime actually, so much supported by intellectuals, alumni of the Universitas Gadjah Mada. So that's the problem. So it's not easy for the Gadjah Mada, to, let's say, express their intention to let's say, the problem of the government currently. But luckily, in the last week, we can say that now this kind of political awareness, empathy, and seems to be, revived, right? And also increasing again among the students. Even in my faculty, 2 days ago, all the lecturers in this faculty and also in the faculty of law, um, give a chance for the students, there is no class for today, and do whatever you like, to do kind of demonstration. And then they do it, they're very happy. I think there's a new kind of, what they call this, in phenomena in the Indonesian students. I think that's all. For the second questions, I would like to give it to Mr. Brotos, to try to answer this question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Uh, yes, Pak Jeffrey mentioned that one of the backbone of our democracy is basically the students, and we always believe that when student is on their move, then we will basically having a bright future. So that is what we believe in. So that is why we did have several student demonstration in the past, and mostly it's related to government's decision. When there was a debate about the new law on KPK, the Anti-Corruption Commission, and student things at that time they thought that the new law will weaken the role of our anti-corruption commission. The students set up a demonstration. So similar with a few days ago, because students saying that the new revised law on district election will basically it will open up the avenue for dynastic politics. So that is why they demonstrate against it. And the interesting part with Indonesia is basically when students are on demonstration, most of their professor will join in. So I think because Dr. Tandon, you mentioned about the role of our civil society, I think that is one of the strongest point of our democracy, basically. So that is why I always believe that we will always have the new forces to go against the old forces. It will be constantly happening in the future. And then the second question on the financing. According to regulation, foreign financing is prohibited, of course. And I don't know whether the meeting is in Pak Prabowo's capacity as the presidential candidate or his capacity as the Ministry of Defense, because currently he holds that position as well. But the issue with financing in election, I think it is more that in the past few years, we have a new phenomenon that we call as relawan, which is a voluntary group. The thing with voluntary group is if you incline to certain candidates and you want to do campaign on his behalf, then it is not against the law. See, so it is basically a leeway, yeah, a leeway if you want to, because definitely financing for campaign has its limitation. But if you do through this relawan, to this voluntary group, then it is not against the law, so you basically freely to do it. And in most of cases, this relawan has their own source of funding, which is mostly it's come from what Pak Dafri mentioned as the oligarch. So of course, yes, we do have that kind of problems, and I think in the near future we have to provide a stronger or stricter regulation on that, because otherwise we will see the flourishing relawan with all of these political activities, but it is untouchable to the law. So I think that is the issues with our financing in this election. And the last one on coalition, I don't know whether this is specific in the case of Indonesia, because Pak Sanjay Kumar, you mentioned about the pre-coalition and then the post-coalition. What happened in Indonesia is whoever win the election from which political parties, then those who are losing the election still has the opportunity to join the governments. In 2019, Prabowo was one of the contender. He lost the election, but then Jokowi decided to ask Pak Prabowo to join the coalition, and then he became the Ministry of Defense. This is something that is, I don't know, maybe this is unique to Indonesia, because now there already been a discussion about two different political parties who were supporting Pak Anies in the last election, who were thinking about joining the coalition, the governing coalition. So that is why some of our political academic students and also commentators, we have a joke saying that in Indonesia, even though you lost the election, you still can enjoy the spoil of victory. So I don't know whether it is related to our culture, because we always think that if we united, that will be better. So even though we have differences in our political platform or even ideology, I think it will be good for the people to see that all of the political elites are united. So I think that is something that is, I don't know, cultural in Indonesia, because I never found this happen in the other part of the world. So I think that is my response.
No, quickly, I think the situation is different compared to what we saw happening in India. Look at how governments have changed in Bihar over last couple of years. So the problem is you contest an election with one political party, you form the government, and then after a few months, or if you're not able to form the government, you don't have the majority, you switch sides and move to the other party. So I think what is happening, based on the survey finding, the trust of the people not on the institution, but on the elected representative is going down day by day, year after year. And one of the reason, I'm not saying this is the only reason, but one of the reason is also the way they keep shifting alliances, the way Professor Sudarshan mentioned, person who was in one party the other day, today he joins a party, gets a ticket. So I think that's the concern. And if this is the concern even in Indonesia, I think it's a learning, should be a learning process for both the countries. That's all I wanted to say.
Just one line, I just forgot to mention that. You know, you talk about the EVM and ballot paper during the last election, not this election. 400 or more than 400 people died, election officers, while counting the votes.
In Indonesia.
In Indonesia.
Yes, yes, but we
So-
are still, I don't know, because maybe we do not really trust with this electronic technological base because it might be rigged, basically.
Yeah.
But I think, oh, sorry. Yeah, so I think that is the problem with us. But I noticed that we have several pilot projects on using this, how you call it, EVP?
EVM.
Yes,
EVM.
yes. We do have that pilot project. I think in the past we had it on the district election in one of the city in Jawa Tengah, in Central Jawa, Boyolali. And hopefully in the future we will think seriously about that.
Okay, thank you. It's my very pleasant duty to thank all the panelists and the audience who listened very attentively. I looked at all your faces, and you were taking in all that was said, and so we are grateful to have such an attentive audience in a seminar. I just have to say one of the exciting moments for me in my brief period in Indonesia was arranging the logistics to import ink from India for the elections. And I suppose Indonesia now manufactures its own ink, but for the first election that way, we had to get ink from India. And that was quite a logistical operation. We did that. Okay, so there is at least, we are imprinted, so to speak, in the democratic finger of Indonesia as India, and we look forward to more such dialogues. So thank you all, and thank you the panelists.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramaswamy, for chairing the session 4. I request all of you to stay a few more minutes because we have reached the valedictory. And Joint Secretary MEA, he has also joined online. He will be offering his concluding remarks. Then my colleague, Dr. Pankaj, will give a vote of thanks. So may I now request Joint Secretary Mr. Sinha to come on board. Can you switch on your camera? Can we? Oh, right. Let me first, just a minute, let me introduce you. Mr. Sinha is a career diplomat with over 19 years of experience in Indian Foreign Service. He is currently heading the Southern Division of the MEA, responsible for bilateral relations with many Southeast Asian, including Indonesia. He has been heading several divisions in the MEA, including the Summit Division. He has closely worked in the Indian presidency of the G20 as a Joint Secretary. He was earlier Indian Deputy High Commissioner in Nairobi in Kenya, and he has over several decades experiences in working with Indian mission in United Nations and many other places. Mr. Sinha speaks fluently in Spanish, in addition to English and Hindi. And he has also worked with the private sector and NGOs. So this is the introduction of the Joint Secretary, and we look forward to hear from you the closing remarks, the valedictory remarks. Over to you, Mr. Sinha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kindly confirm if I'm audible.
Yes, very much.
Just the technical. Okay. Thank you very much. So to start with, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation and gratitude to RIS for organizing this policy dialogue and also having me to speak on the valedictory. I'm sure you must have had very intense discussion from a panel which is drawn from diverse experiences and sectors. My remarks would not be a valedictory in true sense because I didn't have the opportunity to listen to all of you. But nevertheless, I can give you a perspective from the government side on our bilateral relations and how do we see it at this important juncture of completion of 75 years. So this relationship has a very strong historical and cultural perspective. It may sound not of much consequence, but it is very consequential indeed, even now and going forward. You know, our shared heritage, ancient trade route, maritime exchanges, the influence of Ramayana. If you go to Indonesia, one can not escape that. You know, it's so prevalent. And then once we got our independence, we established diplomatic relations in 1951. And in the very first Republic Day, President uh, was President of Indonesia, was the chief guest. So, you know, we have lots, even at that era, from the ancient to in the modern times. This relationship has had strong contents based on shared heritage, shared culture, trade relations, maritime proximity, and maritime relations. As a society, we both are pluralistic society. Indonesia and India both have multi-religious, multi-ethnic composition, and that's another connect. Today we are, we also cherish our democratic credentials. So this dialogue aimed at strengthening the economics and strategic ties to further up our relationship is very important. Over last 2 decades have been very transformative, which included look east policy, and now for last decade act east policy, which is very important now in the current government after elections. We are celebrating 10 years of our act east policy, and we are further intensifying our relationship with all the countries in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN. So our 7.5 decades of progress is, has kept us in a situation where we face similar developmental and security challenges. We have much to celebrate, much to be proud of, but then much to share concerns uh, which have emanated from past and which has kept us glued bilaterally through comprehensive strategic partnership. We have an enduring friendship and robust partnership, multifaceted cooperation which includes defense and security, trade and investment, space, culture, people-to-people contact, and all of these have consolidated this relationship. We are also members of important, in addition to bilateral content in the relationship, at the regional level, ASEAN, East Asia Summit, Indian Ocean Rim Organization, IORA. We all are members, and we very closely coordinate our position in these regional and multilateral fora. Before Indian G20 presidency, it was Indonesian presidency. And as you know, G20 works on the Troika model. So while it was Indonesian presidency, we went out of the way as Troika member to help Indonesia to successfully conclude the G20, because it faced multiple challenges during its presidency, and we too faced a lot of challenges, and we got Indonesian support to clench our communique as well. When Indonesia had its G20 presidency, the world was still recovering from the COVID pandemic. And before we could fully say bye to the pandemic, we landed up into the war in Europe. And that led to a complete division of fracture among G20 members. Now, G20 decision making requires the full consensus of all 20 members on everything. This had clearly divided the 20 member grouping based on their approach and views on the war in Europe. That led to its impact on the areas in G20 which seemingly are not political areas, which is agriculture, which is trade, which is all of that. But then the argument was that the war has led to the crisis across the spectrum. We called it 3F crisis. So food, fuel, fertilizer crisis. Whereas the other side was saying that G20 is an economic grouping and it should not deal and discuss the political issues. So with this context, we worked very closely, very strategically, and led to a successful Indonesian presidency. And we thought that the issue was decided and closed, but incidentally, it wasn't, and it continued during our presidency. And Indian G20 Sherpa, along with the Indonesian Sherpa, Brazilian Sherpa, South African Sherpa, put up a very strong front and approached this issue with a view of what is important for developing countries. The political division or the issue of war, if G20 doesn't come to an agreement, then we lose the gains made in the area of climate action, the gains made in the area of energy transition, the gains made in the area of food security. So that was the narrative created, and that helped a lot in impressing upon and in kind of putting in the corner of those who were wanting to see war as the only challenge to the global population. We said that war is a challenge, but then there are other challenges, and we should not address at G20 the other challenges. So this is the kind of bond which I personally witnessed as Joint Secretary G20. That's why I'm going into detail of that. But we did realize that we have to be together, both bilaterally and plurilaterally. And since I've also had a stint at UN, so I know that at UN also, we both, Indonesia and India, are part of a very powerful grouping called G77, a grouping of developing countries, and we do exchange our notes. We do jointly form the narrative of the developing countries, what is important for developing countries, how should we enforce the historic and colonial responsibility of the developed countries to share their resources through the overseas development assistance, so on and so forth. We have close coordination over the climate and energy issues. So it's a very strong relationship. We, are very close. If you see our Andaman and Aceh of Sumatra are just about 90 nautical miles away from each other. So the development of communities across that 90 nautical miles, has to be coordinated and impacted by the similar factors. Our vision, India's vision of Viksit Bharat by 2047 resonates very well with Indonesia's vision of Indonesia EMAS, which is Golden Indonesia by 2045. So, both countries, when they achieve the centenary of their independence. We are also discussing to coordinate in the emerging areas of fintech, digital, pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth. So almost, it's, as we say, it's a comprehensive relationship. Recently now people have focused on something which is very famous called Bali Jatra, which is a week-long festival celebrated with great fervor in India, and that remembers the strong ties forged by the ancient traders. So, all these things, cultural, educational, heritage, trade, our political alignments, they all help us to remain a very robust friend and a robust relationship. So as we come to close of this policy dialogue, I would like to reiterate our Government of India's steadfast commitment to further deepen and broaden our engagement with Indonesia in a multidimensional relationship and across all levels. I'm confident that with such dialogues, we create a climate, an atmosphere to speed up and to create an ownership of whole of society, all segments who matter in this relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us a rich account of your experiences dealing with developing countries' issues, and particularly Indonesia. We look forward to more interactions in coming days, Mr. Sina. And thank you once again for joining the session. Okay, we have come to the end of the roundtable. And before I request my colleague to give the vote of thanks, it's my great pleasure to thank all of you, the participants, the speakers who have joined online, who are here in persons, my senior colleagues, all our research assistants, our faculty members for joining and attending the conference all through the day. And 4 sessions, there are many takeaways. I'm sure RIS will come out with an outcome document. This is just a beginning for our side, and our partner from Indonesia, I request that we will have another roundtable somewhere in Jakarta or somewhere, so that we can follow up the discussion that we had, the rich account that presented by the session speakers and the chairpersons like Mr. Ramaswamy or Mr. Dr. Tandon. We can follow it up through a counter event or some bigger program. I thank Pankaj, Dr. Pankaj, and his colleague, Dr. Sampa, for working very hard, making this a grand success. I haven't come across in recent time in Delhi this kind of full day interaction on India-Indonesia relations. That to commemorate the 75 years. So thank you very much, Dr. Basist and Dr. Shampa, for your hard work. So over to you, a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. So it's been a long day. We started at 9:30 and we are kind of pushing towards 6. So I will be very brief. So today's policy dialogue has been a joint initiative of 3 institutions. ASEAN India Center at RIS, then we have CES from Jakarta, Center for Southeast Asian Study, and the Embassy of Indonesia in New Delhi. So from on the behalf of all 3 host organizing institutions, I would like to thank each and everyone for participating in this important policy dialogue. First and foremost, I would like to thank the dignitaries, starting from Ambassador Ina Krishnamurthy, Ambassador Sandeep Chakrabarti, then Shri Ashish Kumar Sinha ji, and Shri Ravi Shankar Goyal ji. They could join us and share their view with us. I'm also grateful to all the 4 chairs of the session who very skillfully led us through the discussion during those 4 technical sessions. And I can't thank enough to the speakers who have put in a lot of effort in their presentation and have actually helped us to improve our knowledge about India-Indonesia relation in a length. So I'm really grateful to all the participants, all the speakers. We are planning some sort of a outcome document. We are trying to be a bit ambitious. We think that we will be able to edit some sort of a book out of it. We will be approaching some of the, I think we will approach everyone. So I hope the speakers will oblige and contribute for that edited volume. And last but not least, I'm also thankful to my colleagues here at RIS. Dr. Day is here. He has helped us a lot. My Director General Sachin Chaturvedi, and then my team in the admin as well as in research, they have worked very hard to make this event a success. So thank you very much, and we hope that we will have same sort of event somewhere in the future, as Dr. Day was saying, to have a follow-up on what we have discussed today. So thank you very much for being here and staying with us throughout the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful to meet you. Let me give you my card.
Rajesh, let's take a photo.
Oh, okay.